Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Wednesday, October the 1st, a new month. And here in Liverpool, Labour's waking up with a sore head after some celebrations and perhaps the best conference speech Keir Starmer has given. My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And my name is Sam Coates of Sky News. The Prime Minister cleared a massive hurdle yesterday with a speech that steadied nerves, provided a more logical, coherent philosophy for himself, and tooled up activists with arguments against Reform UK, now Labour's principal opponent, says Keir Starmer. But lingering stubbornly in the conversations, in the bars and the restaurants last night, was the view that big long-term problems haven't gone away.
Today, attention turns to the deputy leadership race. How much is that a proxy for views on the leadership? The candidates say it isn't. Well, they would, wouldn't they? I've been talking to one of them, to Bridget Phillipson, so more on that in just a moment.
But the big target of this conference, all the way through the week, but particularly in Keir Starmer's speech yesterday, was the man who isn't at any of these mainstream conferences, Nigel Farage. And he has been putting out statements overnight to respond to all of the attacks from several people here in Liverpool. And last night he released a statement saying, "We will teach Starmer a lesson next May that British political history will never forget. I am now, as a result of this week and the abuse that has been heaped upon our supporters and voters, more determined than ever. Don't underestimate that." But just how far will Labour continue to go attacking Nigel Farage and his party as a racist? The Prime Minister was fascinating in his conference speech about where he drew the line. He tried to do a precision surgical strike, calling specific policies racist, but not Reform UK as a whole and not Nigel Farage.
And therein lies the difficulty. Can you hold that line, or does it have a habit of turning into something more messy? Enter Deputy Prime Minister David Lammy. He went much further and made claims alleging that Nigel Farage flirted with Hitler Youth. Now, those comments are an apparent reference to allegations that emerged a few years ago, saying that Farage had sung Nazi songs as a teenager, which Farage strongly denied at the time. Now, Reform has said the comments are libelous, they're wrong, and David Lammy, also Justice Secretary, had to rush back onto the airwaves and say that he was happy to clarify them. Well, no one's ever really happy to clarify, but he did say that Nigel Farage has denied it, so I accept he had denied it.
This seems to open up a sort of a front that's quite difficult, I think, Anne. A couple of fronts, really. Earlier in the week, you were suggesting that David Lammy was one of those cabinet ministers who wasn't entirely happy. Do you think this is evidence of that? But also, more generally, that Labour members were delighted to hear the racism word used and the charge. But do you think we could edge into a world where this just causes more complications than it helps?
Yeah, I think it's more complex than it appears at first sight. When you're in this bubble here, people really wanted to hear it. They wanted to hear that punch back to Reform, get off the ropes, tell it like it is. And a lot of people around here would think that Reform and the politics and the ideas of Reform are fundamentally racist. The difficulty, Sam, seems to me anyway, is if you're talking about a specific policy, in this case, the attack on indefinite leave to remain by Nigel Farage, in what way is it really racist as opposed to saying we let too many people in of whatever colour, because race definitely has a colour connotation, as well as just saying people who came to this country from overseas. And then you end up in a bit of a muddle about how you explain that. So you keep going back to the racist charge. So you don't really get away from it. You've got to be prepared to go all the way. And of course, Reform will fight back very hard. On David Lammy, yeah, not suggesting that he's so unhappy that he then had to go off and start a row. But I think you have people, and he's a good example, who are very front foot, very vociferous politicians, moved quite abruptly, I think he feels, from Foreign Secretary. Deputy Prime Minister is a less defined role. Yes, he's got justice to deal with as well. He gets sworn in there today in that Lord Chancellor role. And I think trying to calibrate then, well, is he supposed to be speaking out? Is he not supposed to be speaking out? So I think you can see You can see a lot of senior people thinking, well, do I double down on this? Do I not double down on this? What do you think?
I think that this is part of a bigger pattern, and that cabinet ministers, activists like what they heard in the hall, but aren't quite sure how to turn that into something a little bit more specific, because the detail and the sort of precision beneath it hasn't, it feels like, been completely worked out. Let me give you another example of this. Yesterday, the big announcement that, frankly, Number 10 was delighted that they were able to keep a secret until Keir Starmer delivered it in the hall, was that he was scrapping the Blair era requirement that 50% of school leavers go to university, and replacing it with something different that more reflected the social mobility aspiration that 2/3 of children would go either to university or to a gold standard apprenticeship. Now, we were podcasting, and I was on air after the speech, but some of my colleagues went to the Number 10 briefing, which is a moment where you kind of clarify the detail of these things. And I'm told Number 10 got in an almighty muddle over answers to questions like, well, how many are going to each at the moment? And they just didn't have to hand the kind of basic detail that you need that underlines a big policy announcement like that.
Striking that the Education Minister, Georgia Gould, who has just come into that brief, said that she didn't know either. She was at a fringe. She was pressed on this. She's very connected to Number 10. She knows a lot of the things you're in with the Keir crowd. And she reportedly said, I have no idea. I know as much as you do, which at least was honest. Well done, Georgia. So I pressed Bridget Phillipson when I was interviewing her at the Politico pub about what this gold standard part of this pledge meant, that these would be high quality apprenticeships, but measured how delivered, how funded, etc. And I really was trying to get her to say whether the money on the table, which is not very much at all, supports something like a massive technological education expansion. And I felt that she walked neatly around it. But is it an aspiration? Is it a pledge? What is it? So the government says that the target would include at least 10% of people pursuing higher technical courses by 2040. Near double the current level, okay, but by 2040, and then their degree level apprenticeships, there seem to be a lot of other things as well. So I think they were really in danger now of having to clarify quite quickly what they mean by this. Otherwise, the gold standard is starting to feel, well, it could be a bit more base metal.
That's just really, really interesting and important. And if I'm being honest, hearing you press the education secretary about the principal announcement in Keir Starmer's conference speech yesterday, getting answers like that, it gives me a knot in the bottom of my stomach.
I'm always sorry to upset Sam Coates.
I do actually think that this utterly, utterly goes to the core of where the problem still lies. Because for all of the success of the conference speech, my big question is not whether he could rouse the room and deliver the vibes. It's whether he can get things done. As I've said before, policy isn't Keir Starmer's and Keir Starmer's government strong suit. And I think the thing that terrifies bits of government, and to be honest, I think this is true from the government down and is still true after yesterday's speech, is they think that the PM isn't a policy details person, that precision, the sort of precision that you need to make things happen, just it doesn't interest him. He doesn't like it when people disagree, and they just don't have any faith. And I am including cabinet ministers in this, in the machinery of policy delivery. So I like a couple of quick anecdotes to throw at you. Each one of these blows my mind. So there are some cabinet ministers, get this, who are getting together without Number 10 to try and make policy, very specifically public service reform policy, just cutting Number 10 out of the loop because they just don't think the people, the architecture inside Number 10 is fit for purpose. Okay, so that's massive. Secondly, they're still saying after the Number 10 reset, they don't think the personnel and the architecture on policy works for them and is effectively. Thirdly, they say cabinet meetings are never, ever a forum for debate. Never. It's a sort of polite going round the table. Now, we are used to that in broad terms, but I was told that it never happens. The only example where cabinet involved dissenting voices in any meaningful material way was the debate over Palestinian statehood recognition. And as for the 20 to 30 billion black hole, the complaint there is that the Treasury is not interested in a conversation. They want cabinet ministers completely out of the loop as far as they can see. People I talk to, multiple people, ministers, cabinet ministers, accept the black hole is the biggest issue of the autumn, but there is zero desire from the Treasury to let them anywhere close, take soundings or consult them. So it's just, they're just going, how are we going to get things done if we're not in the loop and we don't trust you to deliver?
Should we put in the words day after word for what Keir Starmer was trying to do here, though? Because I think there are two very weak flanks, aren't there? One is, as you lay out, is policy formation, implementation, but they follow from people knowing what a prime minister wants. And it was really interesting talking to Peter Kyle, now in the business and trade brief, but came up through the Blairite machine as an advisor. And one of the things I asked him, it was at the Tony Blair Institute event, so it was a bit, like the audience wanted to hear, more and more about his own experience. Was that he said that when he'd given Blair documents back in the day saying this is a way we should go in policy, he said almost always, if Blair was interested, something came back saying, "Tell me more." Yeah, and he had once said to Kyle and his team, I will never fault you for giving me too much detail. Why do I have to keep asking you for more detail? I should be the one saying, okay, that's enough. I've got it now. Let me go and have a think about it. Now, I wonder whether Keir Starmer, and in fairness, let's not say it's always about Keir Starmer. He was there to sell a revival. I think he did so pretty well yesterday. But then what about all these other people? What about Darren Jones? What about the people who've come in to support the machine now in number 10? Pat McFadden would be a good example of working pensions, but very close to the whole big project. Is that, are they providing enough detailed material? Are we being a bit putting Keir Starmer's feet to the fire that number 10 machines not up to it? When really, some other people in government have got to ask themselves some questions about this.
I'm not blaming people. I'm just picking up examples of stuff not working. Let me give you another one. And this is something I don't think anyone else has picked up. On Saturday, which in party conference season terms is eons ago, the Chancellor used an interview in the Times to suggest that some of the black hole, 20, 30 billion black hole, could be filled by additional growth, which would be the fruits of the new EU Youth Mobility Scheme. She came as close as possible in that interview on the record to publicly ordering the Office of Budget Responsibility to score it. In other words, upgrade the public finances, shrink the back hole off the back of British participation in that scheme. She told the Times, the OBR scored it when we left the EU. They should score both the improved trade relationships that we've negotiated and the youth experience scheme. Right, bang, clear. As I understand it, there is next to no chance of this happening before the budget because the policy won't be agreed. We are mid-negotiation of all of this through the autumn, and the idea that there is a piece of paper that says what we have agreed with the EU, ready for November, actually you need to get it in earlier to get an OBR verdict on it, is for the bird. Well, almost certainly for the bird. I'm told there's a tiny, tiny possibility that it's true, but not really a material and meaningful one. I mean, that was the Chancellor's big announcement to suggest that there's a plan for the black hole in conference week. And I don't feel it was true. So there we go. I don't know whose responsibility that is. Rachel Reeves, Darren Jones, Keir Starmer, all the unnamed policy advisors, who knows? Anyway, let's turn to the deputy leadership because that's enough on on the top. Let's go down a rung. There are hustings today. It's Bridget Phillipson versus Lucy Powell. Our YouGov polling showed that Lucy Powell is just about ahead. She's the recently sacked cabinet minister. She is ahead of Bridget Phillipson a bit, but there are loads of don't know. So this is a live and interesting contest. Anne, you mentioned you got an interview with Bridget. What did she tell you?
Yes, she was very chilly, Sam, about Lucy Powell's complaints, and it really is quite a tit for tat, this one, because it was Lucy Powell who had lashed out at Bridget Phillipson for claiming that aspects of Powell's campaign, I'm an outsider, I can speak truth to power, that was ill-advised. Phillipson was clearly very nettled about this when she was on stage with me. And she said it was a certain irony that Lucy Powell had called for a wider debate about the direction of Labour. And then she added, when I have a debate, that's apparently a problem. You can just hear that in Bridget Phillipson tone. And she said she would bring members' voices herself to the cabinet table rather than throwing stones from the outside, which clearly ramped up a criticism of the way that Lucy Powell's campaign has been situated or has expressed itself. I think the fight that was being picked as we go into hustings today, Sam, between these two, was she then cited the ghost of John Prescott, the legacy of Harriet Harman and Angela Rayner, saying these people were all in cabinet as well as being deputy leader. I think it's a bit insulting to what they achieved. And the implication was if Lucy Powell couldn't take the heat, she should get out of the kitchen. So it was, I mean, it's salty stuff and quite interesting tonally. We had the poll earlier in the week when we were presenting the YouGov poll. Does this, it's all's fair in love and battles for roles, but this tone is really quite hefty, and is that going to sort of spice it up and get out the don't knows, or is it going to put some people off this whole thing?
I don't know myself, but I certainly think that there's no contest that doesn't end nicely. And Labour Party division is the last thing that Keir Starmer needs at the moment. And you're right to reference that poll. We were in the Politico pub earlier this week doing an event with the brilliant Patrick English of YouGov with all of that exclusive Labour members polling on this race. And just one thing that we picked up at the time, which we haven't yet told our listeners on the podcast about, but it's so stark, it blows my mind, right? Because the numbers tell you that however you cut it, this contest is a proxy for Keir Starmer, his leadership, confidence in him. Let me give you 3 sets of stats. Firstly, 91% of Labour members who back Bridget Phillipson have a favourable view of Keir Starmer. But just 59% of Lucy Powell backers say that Keir Starmer's doing a good job. It's a big, big difference. Secondly, now, if you remember back in 2020, when the leadership contest that elected Keir Starmer was going on, there was a Corbynite candidate. She was called Rebecca Long Bailey. Now, here's the thing. 84% of people who backed the lefty, the kind of hard left candidate in that contest, are backing Lucy Powell, with just 16% of RLB backers going for Bridget Phillipson. So Lucy Powell, whether she wants to be or not, is very clearly the choice of the left. Well, the left that hasn't left to form your party or my party or whatever it's called. Right. And finally, and this is the biggie, 17% of people who back Bridget Phillipson do not want Keir Starmer to lead Labour into the next election. But 47% of people who back Lucy Powell don't want Keir Starmer in place by the time Britain goes to the polls. Right. That is huge difference in opinion. So whether Lucy Powell likes it or not, whether she denounces these findings, whether she declares loyalty to Keir Starmer or not, Lucy Powell is attracting much, much more of the anti-Starmer vote than Bridget Phillipson. That will just mould the kind of candidate she is, and if she wins, will mould the kind of mandate she will think she has to go and be the deputy Labour Party leader.
Yes, I think that's right. And I don't think it's because she herself is particularly lurched leftwards, but I think she is a channel for kind of dissatisfaction. And you boiled down the figures very, very well on that. Now, the question is, has that dissatisfaction, has the net amount of dissatisfaction in the space around Keir Starmer reduced? In which case, 17% or 40-something percent, if on the whole things have calmed down, then I suppose members might say, well, if the rest of the country's feeling better about Keir Starmer, then so am I. Or is it still, and this brings us to the implementation, what's delivered out of this conference? Does it still persist once we leave this warm bubble of, hey, wasn't that a great speech by Keir's standards? That question, I think, hangs over the deputy leadership race, and it also hangs over Keir Starmer as we head off from Liverpool.
Packing up is the order of the day. Dissatisfaction if we go too far over our 20-minute alarm, which you will have just heard a moment ago. So that is it from Liverpool. You've had a huge amount of content. Your feed is busy with the special extra episodes on Sunday and for Keir Starmer's speech itself, as well as the morning episodes. We will be back tomorrow from London for Politics at Sam and Anne's. Thanks. It's been brilliant having your company. Love working with you in person. Love being at the Politico pub in Liverpool. Come and see us in Manchester Saturday, Sunday, Monday for the Tory Party conference, and then a special treat. This podcast may be going on tour overseas, but more on that soon. So we will be back tomorrow from London for the final Politics at Sam and Anne's of the week.
You will see me tomorrow. Just one very quick word. We've both bumped into so many listeners to this podcast around conference, and it's just been the dopamine hit at the end of the long days for loads of people here, including us, to people coming up and saying they listen to the podcast, ideas, suggestions, and it's just been fantastic to meet so many listeners in person. So keep listening, and thanks for talking to us.